Welcome everybody to The Garage with Dennis. I've got a great show lined up for you. Why? Because we're at Westech Performance Group. And if there is one guy on this planet that I'd love to plug a USB port in the back of his head and suck information dry, it would be our guest today, Steve Brule. He's a master of engine tuning and knows exactly how to extract each and every horsepower out of that engine. Now, we do want to say thank you to a couple of our sponsors, of course, Craftsman and Royal Purple. But for now, sit down, hang on, let's go to the engine room and have some fun.
From our studio in Southern California, the hotbed of car culture, covering all things automotive. Welcome to In the Garage with Dennis. Here's your host, Dennis Pitzenbacher.
Before we jump in the engine room with Steve, I want to make a note of one of our sponsors, Craftsman. Craftsman tools are here all over Westech for one good reason: high quality, high use tools. If you have a chance, make sure to go to craftsman.com and become part of the Craftsman Club. Craftsman, made to make. All right, well, we've got him in the dyno room, the guy I told you I wanted to suck information out of the back of his head. Steve Brule, man, you know, this is such an interesting shop. I mean, what is Westech?
Well, basically what Westech is we'll call ourselves an independent dyno test facility. We do a lot of work with major manufacturers, companies like Holley, Edelbrock, Airflow Research, Crane Cams. We do work for them as far as a beta test site. We do verification testing. Then, of course, we're always involved with the media. All the magazine guys come here to do their testing.
Just have a little fun.
Yeah, it's always fun.
How long have you been doing this?
God.
A long time?
You're making me feel older now. I've been here at Westech for probably 16 or 17 years now, since the middle 90s. Prior to that, I'd had a couple of straight gigs, I'll call them, in between. But I actually ran my first Superflow dyno back in the 70s when I worked at a race engine shop in New Mexico.
Really? My question, and I think a lot of the audience wants to know why we're here, why dyno a motor?
God, so many reasons. You know, I get everything in here from guys who are wanting to do development programs as far as finding and extracting that last horsepower like we talk about, to guys who are building really high-end hot rods and want to make sure the thing has no runs, drips, or errors before it goes in that expensive $30,000 or $40,000 paint job. So we get it from the full spectrum.
What is kind of your opinion, would be a better way to put it, of, say, a machine motor or a custom-built motor versus someone going to a crate motor?
Well, you know, I think the crate engines have their place. There's a lot of trends today with hot rodders just taking that simple 400-horse crate motor, bolting it in. They've got something that runs and drives, and they're priced very competitively. But, you know, there's a whole lot of hot rodders out there that take the hobby to the next level, and you end up with things like this that, you know, make 600 horsepower out of 355 cubic inches, you know, for the street. So you've got different guys that have different needs. You know, when you're doing a custom engine, you almost have to dyno test it. Most engine builders now actually will tell their customers that they won't build the engine for them unless it is dyno tested, because it really protects both the end user and the builder.
You know, I noticed that you got one of Holley's new Ultra HPs up here. We've had a chance to play with one of these, and they're not only cool looking, but they're just great carburetors. Yeah. A great, I guess, evolution of the 4150 and 60. But, you know, one of the things that's been a huge trend these days is fuel injection. I mean, you go back and old throttle body fuel injection was not the biggest thing in the world in 1988, but now there's almost a shopping, you know, a catalog of different systems you can use. What's your opinion of use of a carburetor versus fuel injection?
Well, my knee-jerk response, since I'm really more of a carburetor guy, is going to say carburetors are great. But, you know, I'm going to have to admit at some point in time that fuel injection really is kind of the way of the future to a certain degree. Carburetors still have their place, but there's so much more you can do with fuel injection, whether it be taking care of cylinder-to-cylinder air-fuel ratios, dealing with higher horsepower levels. I mean, there are just things that a carburetor can't do. On the other hand, maybe not in California so much, but on the other hand, there are states where, you know, carburetors still aren't an issue for the aftermarket. And, you know, when you can put something like this on for $500, very simply, fuel injection is still going to cost a guy, you know, $4,000 or $5,000 by the time he's done with the whole system instead of $500 or $600.
Would you agree with this statement that as cool as fuel injection is, and as, you know, infinitely tunable as it is with a laptop and software, don't you agree that there is a certain art or pride to tuning a carburetor versus the fuel injection?
You know, 5 years ago everyone told me that I needed to get on the bandwagon with fuel injection, and a guy my age, it was a little tougher. Well, now they call me a specialist. There's so few of us around anymore that can actually tune carburetors. You know, we've got a younger guy that runs our chassis dyno who does all of our EFI tuning. it's kind of funny, but a lot of these young guys, they don't even know where the carburetor jet is. So, you know, each has its place. The older guys you're going to find are still a little more leaning towards the carburetor. You know, still a deal where if the float sticks, you can tap on it. If something happens, we can fix it on the side of the road. That's a little tougher when you've got a laptop. But, you know, the young guys are all thinking that that's the only way to go. It's not even, they don't even talk carburetors anymore.
One of the things you alluded to was Eric and what he does on the chassis dyno side. I mean, you guys just don't do engine room dyno. You do it on the floor as well.
We actually have 2 Superflow engine dynos, and we have a Superflow Autodyne chassis dyno. As great as an engine dyno is, and it's really, in my opinion, a more pure form of testing, particularly for doing development work, there are just less things to influence, you know, what's going on and to give you false information. On the chassis dyno, on the other hand, you've got drivetrain components, transmissions, drive shafts. You know, we've seen where 10 pounds of air pressure in a tire can change horsepower readings. So you have to be very conscientious of all of that, making sure that your testing procedures are all very much in line. But as far as the finals place, the chassis dyno really is it for a street car. But maybe not a race car, but for a street car, the chassis dyno really is the place to finish up.
Well, you're talking about street cars just now. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, this is not maybe something for everyone, but more importantly for the enthusiast, maybe even the hobbyist. What is that true end result? What is the advantage? Like, say it's something like, we talked about Bonneville. You know, there's an end game to why all this is so important. I mean, talk about how that would be applicable.
Well, you know, when you talk about the tune-ups, there's actually, you kind of have to look at different tune-ups in different ways. You know, on a normally aspirated engine, I have no preconceived notion of what the air-fuel ratio should be, how much fuel it should be. The motor will kind of guide me. It'll tell me what it wants. When it's making the best power, it's the happiest as far as timing and fuel. When you're looking at forced induction applications, on the other hand, you kind of have to have some preconceived idea of where you need to be. Because to be very honest, forced induction engines can just keep making more power till they let the smoke out. But so you have to be cautious in those areas, in particular someplace like Bonneville where you've got this thing wide open for 5 miles. I mean, you know, I see tune-ups come in here and I know that if they took them straight to the track, they'd break. It's just as simple as that. They're going to burn them up or break them. Well, no, when I see the data, I know that an engine isn't going to run for 5 miles at 15 to 1 air-fuel ratio, so I know they're going to break it. Now, you know, you hear guys say, well, dyno testing is expensive. It's really inexpensive when you look at the outcome and what you're getting for the return. I see some teams who will go to the races, take 3 guys, get 2 hotel rooms, and they can't touch their butt with both hands for 2 or 3 days. Now, and they've spent well more than a dyno test, and they're completely out of the ballpark. So this is really a place where you have to start if you're at all serious about performance. And like I say, it's a safety factor too. You know, you can break things when the tune-up's not right.
Yeah, and I don't like throwing $40,000 machine motors in the junk, man.
Well, no, and they don't all cost that much, but realistically, you know, I mean, any decent engine deserves it.
Yeah. So let's go jump in the room and do some dyno pulls. Is that a deal?
We'll get ready.
Okay. Steve, before we get going and have a little fun with this motor, I'm sure there's a laundry list of steps that you need to take to make sure it's ready. Take me through your process before a dyno run.
We actually have a checklist of things we go through. I mean, before we actually get to this stage of testing the engine, we've got it mounted, we've checked oil level and primed the oil system, lash valves, basically getting the engine ready to run. Then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and run it through a break-in process, assuming everything there looks good. The next step that we do is we start with some very short little pulls, just to make sure that everything looks the way it's supposed to. We've got some parameters that we're looking at, numbers that we're looking at, as far as anticipated torque per cubic inch, horsepower, those sorts of things. When that looks good, we start extending the runs a little bit longer. The idea being is you can have a lot wrong with an engine for a very short period of time and not hurt anything. So what we're doing is we're looking for trends to start to occur. If something bad starts to happen, we've caught it before it's a problem. So as we proceed, we start to extend those until the engines basically run through a cycle, which also is helping break it in, through a predetermined RPM range, and then that's when we actually start our tuning process. Sometimes we'll have to make changes within that break-in period or within that because things can be so far off. But by the time it gets to here, we've worked on the engine for a couple of hours already, just kind of getting it ready to actually do full throttle dyno pulls.
And have some fun.
And have some fun.
Now we've got the motor ready. Steve, tell me what you do during the run. What are your personal steps on how you do it?
Well, once I've got the RPM limits predetermined, and in this particular case, we're going to run it from 45 to 7,500. When I roll into the throttle, my first glance is at oil pressure and air-fuel ratio. My next glance across the screen is I'm looking at an incoming torque number. If, let's say, for instance, that torque number were down by 10 or 15 pound-feet for no good reason, I'm going to roll back out of the throttle because there's no good reason for it to lose power. So we will go and kind of look at valve train and those sorts of things. But once we've got it at full throttle, basically what the dyno does is it has a electronically controlled torque converter. It'll hold full throttle load at a predetermined RPM. Kind of what gives us our numbers is we've got like a little electronic rubber band, which is reading voltage. The more twisting or the longer that rubber band is stretched, that is related or converted into voltage, which is in turn converted into a torque number. And then with the engine speed, that gives us our horsepower numbers. And what we'll be doing here is transient testing, which is a sweep test from 45 to 7,500. As well as that, when we're done with the initial test, we're going to be looking at brake-specific fuel consumption, brake mean effective pressure. We have literally 100 or better channels to look at when we're all done with the test. We can read air-fuel ratio in every cylinder. We can read EGTs in every cylinder. We have average air-fuel ratios. There's just a whole lot of things to look at. And all of those mean something, and that's kind of where I say the engine's telling you a story, and it'll kind of lead you where it wants to be taken, and that's because of all the data we're gathering.
Well, that was awesome to see that dyno pull. And of course, what do you do to me, Steve? You show me a motor I can't talk about with a product that it just blows my mind and even blows this guy's mind after 20 years of doing this. Guess what? You'll be able to read about it in our friends over at CarCraft's upcoming issue. But for now, Steve, thank you so much for letting us come by the shop. And before I take off, I'm going to go wander around and see what other stuff I can find.
Lots of stuff out there to look at. Thanks, Dennis.
All right, thanks, buddy. Before we take off from Westech, I want to give you a little something to think about from our friends at Royal Purple. Now, they have products from everything from building that old small block for your hobby in your garage. They have HPS with added center link technology that'll help protect older motors, or a great synthetic blend for that brand new motor in your 2014 ride. Either way, we highly recommend Royal Purple, the performance oil that outperforms. All right, you never know who you're gonna run into at Westech, and I was over checking out some of the cool rides, and I ran into a longtime friend, Chad Reynolds. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. You know, it's good to see you guys out here at Westech. Obviously, it's everybody, and all of that comes out here to work on stuff. So, and they somehow let me in the door even.
Well, what's going on, man? I don't think a lot of people realize it's one of the places I go almost every day on the web, Bangshift, man. A very cool website, bangshift.com. You know, tell our viewers about it.
Well, you know, I appreciate it. It's awesome. We're the Car Junkie Daily magazine. So if you think it's cool and you're a car guy, you're going to find it at Bangshift. Everything from tractor pulls to drag races, live streaming video at races all over the country, nostalgia drag stuff, funny cars, tech with Steve and the gang here at Westech. You name it, we got it. Anything that a car guy thinks is bitchin', we're gonna have there.
And occasionally they even show some really cool photos of cars blowing up when people don't always remember to like purge their nitrous tanks or something like that. But it's all you can find, man. Hey, check it out. Make sure to check it out, bangshift.com. Thank you so much for coming by. And once again, unfortunately, we have to wrap up the show. Thanks to everybody once again at Westech Performance Group. Great time here. And once again, I'll say it, we'll see you in the next video.